Hey there, so I'm sure that you've seen them by now. The two-page layouts, the giant-sized posters, the stalwart Superman pointing sky high as three words hang like ominous warnings from some Orwellian nightmare. Bendis is coming. You know, DC, they went out and they poached him from Marvel thinking that he was worth so much. And we've had the mainstream media and the comic book media and all of these Portland pros all clapping like seals, thinking that it would resonate with us because their hype is supposed to be our hype. Unfortunately, we know what these people put out, and we know Brian Michael Bendis. And I'm not saying that some of his stuff hasn't been good, but when you get down to that person and you get down to what they produce, I don't know of anybody that's ecstatic about him going over. I cannot imagine the amount of money they probably threw on the table to not only put him out there, but then to go on this giant publicity campaign saying, hey, we've got the man, the myth, the legend. When you look at the man, the myth, and the legend in things like interviews, and you understand, well, the thing that he's going to bring with him, the identitarian, the attitude, that's not good at all. Also, when you look at this stuff, you wonder what kind of changes he might actually try to bring to Superman. And I know a lot of people have said, well, DC, they actually have stronger editorial. Well, look at some of the people that have been assigned to editorial recently. They are friends with people like Brian Michael Bendis. They are friends with the Kelly Sue DeConnicks out there. Those people, when they're friends with them, they will not stop them from doing things that are not in the best interest of a Superman. And when we get down to it, Superman was actually quite interesting before Bendis ever popped out. The most troubling thing about that, too, is the expectation that DC had versus the reality that consumers were saying existed. So many people were saying, hey, we don't want that, and yet here we are. And well, it reflects in numbers if everyone's favorite little hobgoblin, Rich Johnston, is to be believed. Now, looking at this article here, the Man of Steel orders a lot lower than DC Comics expected. Now, before getting into this, I want to say, too, that this is a very sloppy article. Even by Rich standards, it is very poorly done. Some of these sentences, they mean nothing within it. So, try to glean information from it while you're going through. The way I take this, basically he's saying, hey, these things are returnable. The reason he thinks that they're returnable is because there were issues in development. We actually saw items that were not given enough time. So it sounds like we may actually get some sloppy storytelling there. That's one heck of a way to actually have something debut to you, not giving the people that are making it enough time to actually produce a quality product. That is not a way to kick off the Bendis era, and especially when people are already on the fence about it. But anyhow, let's get this. Last week, Bleeding Cool told you that DC Comics were making the entire run of the Man of Steel weekly miniseries by Brian Bendis and selected artists returnable for retailers if said retailers upped their orders considerably. At the time, Bleeding Cool pointed out that this may avoid DC Comics having announced the comics were returnable at a later date. For example, if they hold off revealing that the chosen and heavily prompted A-list artists for each issue may not have been given enough time to finish the comic in question, and DC have had to give pages to other artists to meet deadlines. We also pointed out how DC editorial types have been running a book on how many pages those will be for each issue. Like that sentence there, I have no idea what that was actually trying to say. Rich, that is a sloppy sentence. Continuing. However, I've been tipped off by DC editorial sources that these numbers that DC Comics received were a lot lower than expected. A lot lower. Less than you might expect for a new Superman title relaunching the character with A-list talent and spinning out of Action Comics 1001 and DC Comics 0, and more like, well, a newly launching Brian Bendis title at Marvel without the tiered variants. And out of the top 10 as a result. So we may be looking at something that doesn't even land in the top 10. That would be insane, especially coming off all of the hype that we've seen out there, because you're talking about something that's not cheap. I mean, when you're going out and you're creating that publicity campaign, they're basically giving away pages because those are advertisement pages. They thought that that would lead to enough hype that it would pay for itself. So, I mean, when you look at that, I mean, really think what underperformance would actually do there. There have to be people thinking, oh my God, what exactly have we gotten ourselves into? But continuing here, the announced returnability was an attempt to save face by upping their numbers, as was a larger than usual internal order of copies of Man of Steel 1 for the summer convention circuit. So you see there too, there's actually the lie promoted within numbers. They actually promote their own numbers. They order their own products so they can say, hey, we sold that. That there is something that we see time and again. We see things like overshipment and yet we're told we don't like something, we shouldn't buy it. Well, if we don't buy it, no one else is buying it. So maybe these companies should be listening to us for a change. Continuing here, add it all up and you might get 100,000 orders, but remember, Diamond will report those Man of Steel numbers at 10% down because they are returnable. Okay, well, if you had 100,000 or even if you had 90,000 in this day and age, that's still top 10 material. I don't know what world Rich Johnston thinks this is, but the top 10, even with monster numbers like we've seen, they still weren't that great. A lot of times we see no 100,000 numbers breaking in. Even if you were to add 10% for digital copies, you still see nothing cracking it, or you might see one comic out there. This month, it had some huge things, some huge milestones, the launch for Wolverine and on, but that is an exception to the rule. And when you look at the flat returns, the middling comics, I'm going to actually cover an article from that, from CBR of all places. Well, you can see that there's a problem. But anyhow, continuing here, but expect Justice League 1 by Scott Schneider and Jim Chung to have done better, and any issues of Batman by Tom King, and probably Doomsday Clock by Jeff Johns and Gary Frank while you're at it. Still, you know, Ultimate Spider-Man started off with low orders, and look what happened. So anyhow, tell me what you think about this. Also, do you really think that these companies, do you think that they actually understand what we're seeing here? Are they in denial? I mean, when you look at numbers right now, we saw Action Comics 1000 set a high century mark, meaning from 2000 on. They sold 450,000 units. Last year, the highest thing that sold was a little over 300,000, and we've seen a couple of comic books this year actually break 200,000. Besides that, however, even with those numbers, we still see a downturn because when you remove the milestones, normal comic books, they are not selling. They are having problems. People are simply not buying them. I think that if comic book companies, they really want to see change, they need to start talking to comic book consumers and really listening to what we're saying. And when I say comic book consumers, I'm not talking about that shrill minority out there that likes adding hashtags and likes putting together buzzwords to inflate their egos. I'm talking about people that literally spend money on products. If they do not start courting better products and better practices, with practices meaning professionalism, then the numbers that will keep going down. And we will see that after the milestones clear. I mean, we have another milestone with Spider-Man 800. After that clears, if we don't have any more right there in our face, we are going to see downturns in numbers. I mean, right now, even with the numbers that we saw this month, even CBR talked about them being stale numbers. And you know that these places are essentially cheerleaders for the comic book industry. So if they're pointing out an issue, well, there definitely is an issue. But anyhow, let me know what you think of all of this. And remember, Bendis is coming, but he's also returnable. Thank you.